Welcome to Mortification of Spin, a casual conversation about things that count, with Carl Trueman, Todd Pruitt, and Amy Bird. Mortification of Spin is a weekly podcast from the Alliance of Confessing Evangelicals. Today our hosts talk with Canadian power couple Sandy and Linda Finlayson. The Finlaysons are both authors and share their time on the podcast talking about their various interests, including Scottish reformer Thomas Chalmers and writing for children. Stay tuned after to find out how to get a free copy of Sandy or Linda's newest books.
Well, we're broadcasting on location again today. The location's actually secret because the people involved do not want their location revealed to the general public. But all I would say is we're standing outside a major Trekkie convention. The annual gathering of those who big fans of William Shatner, the great Canadian cultural icon. And we're privileged today to be interviewing two other Canadian cultural icons. This is a man who's been known to Reformation 21 readers over the years simply as the shadowy figure, known only as the librarian. Well, today we're going to out him on air. His identity is actually Sandy Finlayson. He's the professor of theological bibliography and the librarian at Westminster Theological Seminary. And he's married to the present Mrs. Finlayson, who is a children's author. Sandy himself has written a couple of books on 19th century Scottish divines. Linda is well known for writing books that provide short biographical essays on famous Christians throughout the whole of church history, aimed particularly for children to educate them in the history of the faith in the post-apostolic era. So it's great to have the Finlaysons on board today. I want to start off by asking Sandy. Sandy, you're a Canadian and a librarian. Most people would regard one of those things as almost too much to bear, but you're both. How is it that you manage to maintain a relatively cheery disposition despite the obvious disadvantages that you've been born with?
Well, life sometimes does throw on difficult curves. That's certainly the case. I would say, however, that being a Canadian is not all that bad. There are many things in Canada that one can be proud of. I know that you folks here around this table are fans of popular culture and music, and yes. So Canada has produced people like Oscar Peterson,
Justin Bieber,
Bruce Cockburn, Neil Young, Glenn Gould, one of the greatest Bach exponents in the 20th century. So, I mean, there are some things that Canada could have done better and not inflicted on the world, but this is true of many countries. I mean, Canada doesn't have on its conscience the Sex Pistols or the Spice Girls. Or Boy George. So
he emigrated to the United States.
So I think it's important that we keep in perspective that perhaps Canada hasn't done as much damage as maybe even some other countries.
That's not a bad point. And honestly, any country that has given us William Shatner, I'm a fan of that country. So,
well, hockey is actually a greater export than William Shatner. Hockey is a real sport, other than this baseball thing that that Americans have going on.
Stop it.
Well, I mean, I'm just saying that hockey is an actual real sport.
Well, I think it puts on
baseball, where they're having this World Series featuring two teams from the United States. It's just exhibiting a little bit of hubris, I would have thought.
I would say this. I think that hockey perfectly embodies the violence of the Canadian people. And which has bothered us Americans for a long time. Us being to your southern border, we look at the kinds of things that go on in Canada, even in your sports, and we're deeply concerned about your violence.
Well, that's most unfortunate that we've terrified you. I had no idea that you'd appear so terrified. Well, I didn't really realize that Americans were quivering in fear.
Absolutely. I mean, Shania Twain has helped.
Oh, well, I'm so glad that's been good.
Yes.
That softened the image a little.
Absolutely.
I have to say, Steppenwolf. Got to give the Canadians.
Okay. You're not giving us credit for Oscar Peterson.
Steppenwolf, Rush, and Oscar Peterson.
I will.
I'll grant you those
I will
three.
give you credit for Rush.
Yeah.
I absolutely will for that. It doesn't make up for your violent nature, but I appreciate it nonetheless.
The William Shatner theodicy question perplexes theologians to this day, but we'll leave it there.
I think that's above my pay grade to answer. I'm just a librarian. So there are some things that I don't have to answer.
All right. Well, you're actually here because you wrote a book. And in reading the introduction, I'll let you introduce the title, but sometimes you can really learn a lot about a person from the introduction and acknowledgments. And I learned that you wrote a whole book because you disagreed with a tour guide.
That's correct. Linda and I visited Scotland a number of years ago, and the first thing that we did when we arrived in Edinburgh was to take one of the historic bus tours that they have in the heart of the city. And we went through a number of the historical places, and we passed St. Giles Cathedral and John Knox's house, which is across the street from St. Giles Cathedral, and the tour guide opined that John Knox was responsible for the subjugation of women throughout the ages in Scotland. And I thought this was a curious thing to highlight in his career, as well as religious intolerance. He was also accused of that. So I just sort of sat there. I was partly jet lagged, so I didn't respond as quickly as I might have. But the bus tour continued, and a few minutes later we passed a statue of Thomas Chalmers, who was one of the leaders in the evangelical movement in the Church of Scotland in the 19th century, and subsequently was the first moderator of the Free Church of Scotland. I'd grown up in the Free Church, and so I knew a little bit about Chalmers. So, being slightly mischievous, I said to her, "Well, who's on that? Who's depicted in that statue?" And she thought for a minute, and she said, "Well, some dead white guy." And I thought, it really is stunning that in 150 years, the knowledge of someone who was really central to church history and Scottish identity had been completely lost. She had no idea who he was. Some dead white guy. So I decided if I ever had the opportunity that I'd try and write a biography of Chalmers that would help to explain him to 21st century readers and talk a little bit about who he was, what he had done, and why he still matters.
And obviously, you've written a book on this, so you could talk for quite a while. But briefly, why does he matter?
I think he matters because he shows that you can be a church leader, have a real impact on your church, have a real impact on your society. The church can be relevant. The church can have a major impact on the society simply through the preaching of the gospel. He was someone who saw that the primary job of the church was to preach the gospel. Out of that, he believed that the church could make a difference in the lives of individual people. He really wanted the church to reach into communities and help people with education, with their physical needs. He was very responsible for the revitalization of both the biblical office of elder and deacon in 19th century Scottish Presbyterianism. And he mobilized elders and deacons in his congregations to really reach out to the lives, get involved in people's lives, and help them. He was also passionately committed to education. A lot of people in the 21st century talk a lot about Christian education, and he believed that education was something that the church should be actively involved in. Established schools that not only taught the Bible and theology, but also taught literature, mathematics. The fact that poor children in major cities in Scotland received an education was in part through the revitalization that took place in the second half of the 19th century under Chalmers' leadership in both the Church of Scotland and in later in the Free Church.
So Carl would hate this guy because he didn't mind his own business, right?
Somewhat, yes. I mean, one thing that Sandy didn't mention that I think you mentioned in your book is, of course, that Chalmers is so significant in his own day that I think he's the only Presbyterian to be criticized by Karl Marx in Das Kapital.
That is correct.
He was a significant social thinker, not just a theologian and churchman. Yeah. I guess my pushback, Sandy, would be the establishment principle lies at the heart of what Chalmers does, and I just don't see it in the New Testament. How would you respond to that? I agree with the phrase we can change things by preaching the gospel, but it seems to me that Chalmers wants more than that. Chalmers was a more politically proactive person than I would be comfortable with in the church today. How would you respond to that?
Well, Chalmers' understanding of the establishment principle is that he believes that there ought to be a relationship between the church and the state. He does not think that the state should be neutral with respect to religion. He thinks that the state has a duty to support the Christian faith through providing finances for churches, for pastoral stipends, for Christian education. He argues that because Christ is both King of the nations and King of the church, that the radical separation that we now see between the church and the state is actually not found in Scripture. To be sure, the largest evidence for that is found in the Old Testament, where there is a theocracy. And I think it's important to make a distinction between theocracy and the establishment principle, because theocracy essentially says that we will only tolerate one religion. That's not what the establishment principle is saying. The establishment principle says we should maintain Christianity. We should support the church. It doesn't say that the state should be actively persecuting or disenfranchising people that we don't agree with. One of the things that Chalmers got into trouble for in his time was he actually supported Catholic emancipation in the 19th century, where the British government decided to extend the franchise to Roman Catholics and also to remove the barriers that they had previously experienced in being able to serve in government. He did not think that that was appropriate. He thought that the gospel should be allowed to the church should be allowed to stand on its own terms, preach the gospel, and not be afraid of people that it disagreed with. So I think that in some respects, what Chalmers is arguing for is simply the fact that the state should not be neutral toward all religions. He would point to the larger catechism of the Westminster Confession of Faith that talks about the fact that we're required by the second commandment not to tolerate false religion. And I think that's something that has certainly gotten lost in the 20th and the 21st centuries. And I think we're seeing the results of that now, where every religion is seen as being equally valuable.
Right. Yeah, the egalitarianism of all ideas.
Yeah.
I like how you set up the book as your argument against the statement that he was some dead white guy, but then you close it with his legacy, the deep, genuine grief at his death, and just how that revealed, you say, someone important had died.
Yeah.
And so could you compare that day in history then to the day that, you're sitting on this tour bus and you're, looking at this statue of the man and hearing those words from your tour guide?
Yeah, it really is quite stunning that, Chalmers died very suddenly. He was only 67 when he died. He essentially worked himself to death. He had been pastor of large churches. He had served at the University of St. Andrews. He'd served at the University of Edinburgh. He'd served at the Free Church, at New College after the establishment of the Free Church. He had been someone who had been in the forefront of Scottish life for probably the 35, 40 years before his death. From the moment he left his first parish in Kilmany to move to Glasgow, he began to be seen as a leading figure in the evangelical church, in the evangelical part of the Church of Scotland. And he'd had an impact on everyone in Scotland simply because he had been the person who had been largely responsible for organizing the evangelical wing in the Church of Scotland. He raised huge amounts of money for the creation of schools. He had led a church extension movement that had seen new churches created all over Scotland. If there had been CNN back then, he would have been one of their go-to people to talk to on matters of faith and life.
That would have been a good thing for the tour guide to say.
It would have. It would have. Yeah.
Exactly.
I mean, another perhaps less tangible impact of his life is that he motivated huge numbers of people to go into the ministry and to serve on the mission field. His greatest legacy as a professor at St. Andrews, I would say, is that he revitalized their missionary society. And at the time when there was the split in 1843 between the churches in the Church of Scotland that created the Free Church, every single missionary of the Church of Scotland left the church to join the Free Church. And I think Chalmers played no small part in that because he was passionately committed to the proclamation of the gospel, not only in Scotland but around the world. In his very first parish, he went around preaching about the need for missionary and Bible societies. And he wanted people in his parish to support those, even if they could only do so on a very, very small scale. Because he thought every Christian should be involved in missionary work, even if it only came down to them being able to put a small amount of money toward the work of those societies.
This just in. Derek Thomas, friend of Mortification of Spin, reads from the classics. This week, The Trees, by that great Canadian cultural icon, the band Rush.
There is unrest in the forest. There is trouble with the trees, for the maples want more sunlight and the oaks ignore their pleas. The trouble with the maples, and they're quite convinced they're right. They say the oaks are just too lofty and they grab up all the light, but the oaks can't help their feelings if they like the way they're made, and they wonder why the maples can't be happy in their shade.
And now we return to your regular scheduled programming.
Well, along the lines of the church impacting society and the world around it, we, as Carl mentioned earlier, we we're privileged to have, in addition to Sandy Finlayson, the estimable Linda Finlayson. And the connection as far as the church and society, I suppose my question, Linda, would be, are you still in favor of Christians violently converting the masses to Christianity? And why do you seem to be in favor of that? We were a little stunned to read a review. In fact, Carl, I'd like you to make reference to this review of Linda's newest book. It was found on Amazon. And Carl, help us understand this person's perspective here.
It's very disturbing, the review. It's disturbing from the word go, because the person starts their review of the book with the phrase that always shakes my confidence in a book review: I haven't read the book. It's only the title and cover I hate. But it goes on to make a fair point. I mean, I know Linda. I know that she tries to terrify people into converting to Christianity. It culminates with this. You can't force people to believe. You can't threaten them into submission to your God. If you spread your religion through violence, you might terrorize people into pretending they believe, but surely you'll drive their hearts away. I mean, Linda, you've been publicly called out here as somebody trying to convert people under pain of death. How would you respond to that?
And are you still drowning Anabaptists? Go.
Well, it's patent nonsense is what it is.
Maybe Linda's the true shadowy dark.
Exactly.
All I would say is, when Linda's taught Sunday school, more children go into that room than come out. That's all I'll say.
Okay, enough fun at Linda's expense. Linda actually does write very helpful biographical and historical sketches from church history. She writes them primarily for children. I have read several of them. They're quite helpful and fun and informative and all the things that you want a book for children to be. Linda, you have the capability to write a lot of different things. Why do you write for children?
I've always worked with children from the time I was teaching Sunday school at the age of 18. I worked with them in churches, schools, run kids clubs. I just like children, and I like being able to communicate with them. I think people often underestimate what a child can learn and understand. Mm-hmm. And I know as a child myself, I really objected to people talking down to me. Yeah. I wanted to be treated like anybody else, and preferably as an adult, please.
Yeah.
So I do try in my writing to make sure that I'm not talking down to children, that I use vocabulary, and I try to use words that may not necessarily be familiar. If I'm writing about a medieval person, I'm going to use the names of things that we don't have today. Right. But that's okay, because they can look it up, either in the back of the book, which has a glossary. Yeah, or you can just use context. Mm-hmm. But I just think that children have a wonderful capacity to learn, and I enjoy writing for them.
Your latest book, Wielding the Sword, focuses on the role of the Word, its preaching and its teaching. What do you want your young readers to come away with?
How important God's Word is. Mm-hmm. And the importance of continuing to preach and teach the truth. And maybe as a child, maybe just to learn and know what that truth is, and to understand what their preachers and teachers, the role that they have in their lives and what they've had in the past. And that what's happening for them in their church right now has been happening since the beginning. There's a continuous building up of the church, and it's not something that's new.
One of the interesting things, Linda, and you alluded to it there, you mentioned medieval figures. In your latest book, Wielding the Sword, you address Anthony of Padua. Even Gregory the Great, he's an earlier figure, but we'd sort of class him as medieval in some ways. A lot of Protestant evangelical people, they might see the value of looking at Augustine, who you deal with, or even John Chrysostom. But then from the era of sort of 500 through to about 1517, when Luther burst onto the scene, most Protestants would shrug their shoulders and say, not a lot goes on there, there's not much point in knowing about it. But you've self-consciously not done that. You've chosen medieval figures, and some of them, in the case of sort of Anthony of Padua, medieval figures who perhaps would be very far away from those that Protestants would think of as being allies. Why do you do that?
I think it's important that we realize that the church did not stop with the early church and begin again with the Reformation. Mm-hmm. God has his people in every generation and in every place. They might not look exactly as they do as a 21st century Christian, but sometimes that's an arrogant kind of view because it assumes that we've got it all right and they don't.
Right. That's a good point. Yeah. One thing I really enjoy about your books is talking to a lot of different women who just don't like to read. And one thing I have noticed, though, in trying to get them to read more is that they enjoy biographies. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's wonderful that you write these short biographies, just short chapters in your book, starting, aiming at children. What a great way to motivate adult readers then as well. I mean, parents reading it to their children at night, that's what I do. I've been reading them to my son, and he's been enjoying them. So parents who have not read any church history are going to also learn from reading your books. And but then you're also developing these young readers that will have a much broader appreciation, maybe just for theology and church history as well. So I like how you have put together the genre that you have. And then for me, when I'm reading these stories, sure, I've learned about Augustine and people, certainly not everyone that you've written about, but I'm getting a more personal side to the story and starting to think of some ways that I hadn't before. Like just in reading about Augustine, sure, all the other times I've read about his concubine, and sure, he needed to ditch that woman. But in your telling of the story, you really reveal the personal pain, when you give your love to someone that you shouldn't. Mm-hmm. And, it really made me stop and think about the personal elements and the consequences of sin at a deeper level. So I really appreciate the personal touch that you put into the stories. And I think it doesn't just relate well with children, but with adults too.
And biography is a great foil for teaching so many of those things. Indeed. Yeah. People's lives are just full of things that we can use to inspire. Right. Who have been your maybe top 3 favorite people that you've written about, if that's a fair question? Well, I wrote a biography also on Mary of Orange, of William and Mary. Yeah. And I have to admit, when I had first come across her, I had not realized that she was a Christian, and that she died very young. She was just in her early 30s. But I was very surprised as I did my research to discover that even at her, she was a shadowy figure, if I might say, because she was dominated.
Yes. Was she a librarian?
No. She was dominated by the kings in her life.
To those shadowy figures.
She was dominated by the kings in her life, and she also had some tragedies that she had to deal with. And I was just struck with how much God taught her on a personal level that I think is applicable for any woman who would read that book. Yeah. And it's important to help introduce children, particularly in the comfortable West. It's important to introduce them to things like tragedy and death, whereas earlier generations had to deal with that regularly at very young ages. Oftentimes, we have a generation that has the luxury to not think much about tragedy, death, and loss, oftentimes. And biography can become a way to help children begin to grapple with those things that very often they're shielded from in our culture. Mm-hmm. That's good.
We do live in a culture, of course, where we're told that people read less and less. Do you have any advice on how you would encourage children to read? Exciting stories. And that's one of the reasons I think history is great. It's just full of exciting stories. Yeah. And you can sort of lure people in if you can get a good story. I mean, people certainly, they may not read as much, but they look for the excitement in a movie or TV programs.
Well, it draws them to Facebook. Find something exciting for their day.
Do you have a favorite children's author yourself? Don't want to not necessarily make a commercial pitch for the opposition here, but...
well, someone who inspired me when I was younger is actually a Canadian author, Jean Little, who wrote children's stories that dealt with children facing difficulties of various kinds. And that sort of encouraged me to think about presenting real life rather than nice little stories.
Very good.
I think the other thing that is that parents have a huge role to play in getting kids to read. I mean, Amy mentioned reading to her son. I think that's absolutely critical. Both Linda and I, whenever we have an opportunity to give gifts to young people, we give them books. And I think it's part of the parental role to make sure that books are central in children's lives from day one. That's how you do it. You do it by modeling it.
Right.
And Sandy, just as we're sort of moving towards a close here, but is there anything that people should read by Chalmers, or is he one of these figures who now functions more as an inspiration and not a resource for Christians today?
He was a prolific author. I think his collected writings amount to something like 25 volumes that were published, some of them during his life, some afterwards. I think his sermons still connect with people, and you can find them, many of them online actually, because they're long since out of copyright. So there are selections of his sermons that I think would be important for people to look at. The other thing that he did was that he wrote a series of daily Bible study notes that are very devotional in their character, and I'd suggest people look at those.
This has been a great conversation, guys, and I'm getting kind of itchy in this Trekkie costume, so I think I'm going to have to say goodbye to y'all, but just want to thank everyone for listening, and please visit our website at mortificationofspin.org, and we'll talk to you next time.
Picture yourself in a boat on a river with tangerine trees and marmalade skies. Somebody calls you. You answer quite slowly. A girl with kaleidoscope eyes. Cellophane flowers of yellow and green towering over your head. Look for the girl with the sun in her eyes, and she's gone.
Thanks for listening to Mortification of Spin, a podcast of the Alliance of Confessing Evangelicals. The Alliance is a coalition of pastors, scholars, and churchmen who hold to the historical creeds and confessions of the Reformed faith, and who proclaim biblical doctrine in order to foster a Reformed awakening in today's church. We have a few copies of Sandy Finlayson's book, Thomas Chalmers, and Linda Finlayson's book, Wielding the Sword, to give away. If you're interested in these books, visit our website, mortificationofspin.org, and enter your name for an opportunity to get a free copy. While you're there, be sure to check out the Mortification of Spin blog. We look forward to being with you next week as the gang talks with a local pastor about his ministry.
Sometimes we have people who are quote-unquote well-known, famous on here, but we've also had guests, and hopefully, by God's grace, we'll continue to have guests that are not nationally known, and that's the way it should be.
We'll see you next week. And don't forget to stop by mortificationofspin.org.
It's going to take me a minute to calm down.
I can do my Barry White. Can't get enough of your love, baby. Oh, I don't know, I don't know, I don't know why.
I think that Todd should definitely lead the hymns in church with that voice.
Oh dear.
This is how it typically
Everybody
goes.
will join.
I sort of, having listened to the finished product, I feel like there's likely a fair bit of hilarity.
Imagine how much work it goes into
to censor it.
The editing that Aaron has to do. I mean,
So, well, I'm ready to go whenever.
Okay.
You ready?
Let's do this.